Through.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Talk loud.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You have to put up with me today. Our esteemed President is dispensing justice in the Melbourne Magistrates Court. So he's asked me to deputise for him. A lot of things happening in Canberra in terms of ethics and all that sort of thing. And I found a good quote from Winston Churchill. The Sermon on the Mount was the last word on ethics. A lot of wisdom in that. And some Jewish friends of mine sent me a couple of Jewish jokes. They didn't mind because they'd been using Catholic jokes a lot. What's the difference between a Rottweiler and a Jewish mother? Eventually the Rottweiler lets go. Why are Jewish men circumcised? Because Jewish women don't like anything that isn't 20% off. All right, do we have any visitors? Diana, welcome to support Joe in his first presentation to us, which we're looking forward to. Do we have any birthdays? No birthdays, okay. I think it's appropriate to record our thanks for our 40th celebration last month. A great event, even though it was slightly on the cold side because unfortunately the Anglican Church hadn't paid the bill and we couldn't have the heating. No, that's not true. It was just that the heating unfortunately wasn't working. But it was a terrific event, and I think it's appropriate to record our thanks for a number of people who particularly made it a success. And one, of course, is Gary Papworth, who set the whole scene up, etc. Graham Ratton, heavily involved with Andy Walsh in the setup and in the aftermath in terms of cleaning up. Unfortunately, the Anglican Church hadn't paid the electricity bill either, so the dishwasher didn't work. But again, that was just an unfortunate thing. The dishwasher didn't work, so Andy and Graham went through a pile of dishes in the old-fashioned way. Our thanks to the Bandicoots. Our president, of course, was the drummer, and of course Graham pass on our thanks to Nick for the lead singer in the group. Absolutely outstanding. So it was terrific to have that entertainment as part of our 40th celebration. And hopefully, I think John took a lot of photographs, and hopefully there'll be some in the Probus Pacific next newsletter showing off our 40th celebration. Perhaps at this stage, Graham, I might ask you if you want to have a few words about a big event coming up for the Heidelberg Choral Group at the Melbourne Recital Centre.
Thanks, David. The Heidelberg Choral Society is conducting a world premiere of a work called Origins, which the blurb here says it's a breathtaking oratorio inspired by cosmology, evolutionary genetics and ecology. It describes the origins from the Big Bang to the emergence of humanity and celebrates the role of science in understanding and protecting our planet. So it's a major thing. Nicholas Buck, composer, Peter Bandy, the conductor. It's on Tuesday the 18th of July, 7:30 p.m. at the Recital Centre, and I understand that seats are selling very rapidly. So if anyone wants to go, I'd suggest that you book soon, because apparently the centre bit's all booked out. So there we are. I've left some flyers on the round table at the back there if anyone wants to have a look at the flyer. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. That'll be a great event, and of course we're so fortunate to have a group like the Heidelberg Choral Group in our community. In the absence of the Vice President, who's up with family in the far north, Andy is going to call the roll.
Mr. Rob Adams. Dr. Peter Benford.
Yep.
Mr. Noel Benton.
Apology.
Mr. Bert Berryman.
Yes.
Mr. Bruce Bazant.
Yes.
Mr. Heck Davis.
Apology.
Mr. Michael Doherty.
Yeah, present.
Mr. John Doherty. Mr. Len Edwards.
Yes.
Mr. Robert Urbacher.
Apology.
Mr. Alan Evans.
Present.
Mr. Brian Fitt.
Present.
Mr. Mick Francis, where's the way, Mick? Mr. Bob Frensham. Mr. Noel Griffith.
Here.
Mr. Stuart Hall.
Apology.
Mr. Frank Henning.
Present.
Dr. Bob Hill.
Apology.
Mr. Detlef Hingst.
Apology.
Dr. John Horsfall.
Present.
Mr. Reg Jackson. Mr. David Jones. Oh, we know that.
Present.
Yeah, sorry. Dr. David Lund.
Present. Run.
Mr. Jerry Mazzoletti. Mr. Brian McMahon. Dr. John Metcalf.
Present.
Dr. Gary Nervo. Mr. Gary Papworth.
His apology for Gary.
Dr. Graham Bratton.
Yep.
Mr. Kevin Ryan.
Yes.
Mr. Will Semler. Mr. Colin Stiles. Mr. David Taylor.
Present.
Dr. Les Thurling.
Apology.
Mr. Keith Tupper.
Present.
Dr. Livio Turacek.
Here.
Yes, myself. And Reverend Alan Williamson.
Here.
John Perry Jones.
Apology.
Apology.
And Joe Landsberg.
Yep, present.
Thanks, Joe. Bill Carter. That's it. That's it, Judge.
Thanks, Andy.
And Ron Speechley here.
Yeah, Ron Speechley's here.
Well, Ron, I beg your pardon. I'll put you on the list.
You recorded one. Just thinking about the 40th, thanks to Ian for the grace at our 40th celebration, which was very, very appropriate as part of that event. So we can all look forward. Well, I suppose we'll do a 45th. Want to take a poll on how many of us will be here for the 45th? Get better odds for the 45th than the 50th, I think, but never mind. We won't go into that too much. Now, our very careful treasurer, Bert.
Well, the bank balance is 2,048. We subs we had 1,605. For the lunch we had 2,650. On the payments side we've paid Grover South Pacific 670. St George's Church rent 300. Catering 2,077. Music 145. And left with 2,048. And petty cash we got 139 unchanged, $139.
And Mr. Treasurer, have we still got a few dragging the chain on the sub?
Yeah, only a small number, but we've been chasing them up.
Okay. Well, I encourage everyone, if anyone who
There's only half a dozen.
hasn't paid their sub to shoot it through to our bank account or to Bert.
Yes.
So that we can get the slate clean. Our very caring almoner, Dr. David Lunn.
Thanks, David. Most of what needed to be said was in the newsletter. Just a couple of things to add. Les Thurling is not here today. He's having a knee replacement tomorrow. We wish him well. And Gary's not here. He's been waiting for a knee replacement. I'm not sure if that's the reason he's not here today.
Yes, it is.
It is, yeah.
Because he's been waiting a long, long time.
Yeah.
Still waiting, is he?
Is he still waiting?
He's still waiting here. He's not mixing in case he gets an infection.
Ah,
Because
that's
he's been put off previously because of having an infection, so he's keeping very much to himself until he gets it done.
He did tell me that and I forgot.
The
The only other thing, I spoke to Beryl Abad a couple of days ago. Rodney's very much the same, in care of course. Difficult some days, but mostly placid. And Beryl's having some real problems after having a hip replacement some time ago. And that is the latest news.
Yeah, well, it was great to see Beryl at the 40th and lunch.
Yes.
Rosemary Pierce, David.
Rosemary Pierce I spoke to maybe a week ago, and she's in a retirement village in Reservoir and very content there, making good company and a lot of activities. Had a fall recently from which she's recovered, which is the reason she wasn't able to come to our 40th.
Yep.
But going pretty well.
Terrific. David, thanks as always for your care and your attention to our members and keeping us informed. Pretty critical part of this club. Our ever busy secretary, Colin.
Not much to say. We're having the rotation with the book. I'll facilitate that. We'll probably meet 3 monthly so we don't lose momentum. There was an area meeting which involved the Wiggle ladies, Heidelberg, Ivanhoe ladies and us. That went smoothly. We did suggest for discussion that the minutes of the 3 groups could be shared amongst one another such that ideas can progress. The idea of at least twice a year common meetings, that was a good idea. And also that we could give each other the outline presentation such that any of these three groups would come and visit other groups when they get having particularly interesting speakers. A bit of chatting, but really worthwhile afternoon and morning. Morning, I should say.
Okay, thanks, Colin. I think we've started the process of exchanging books today with those that are part of the book club, and we may organise a sycamore tree gathering to discuss our reactions to the books. It's a great initiative from Colin. It'd be nice to see more join it. In relation to the golf day, it's something I've been discussing with the Latrobe Golf Club in terms of a golf day which would consist of 2 rounds of a par 3 5-hole course at Latrobe, which would mean 10 holes, and then some lunch, and with others being able to come at the lunch if they don't want to play golf, because we've got this beautiful trophy that's dying to be presented to someone. So I'm still working on that with Latrobe. The day that probably is going to suit best as far as they're concerned is a Thursday. Can I have a bit of a show of hands as to who might be interested in actually playing, so that I can try and get a fix on numbers for the club, apart from attending for lunch, but to actually play in the event? Colin, anyone else? Michael Doherty, yeah, 2, might play, that's 3. We got any more? Yeah, Joe? 4. Okay. Yeah, well, I might work on the basis of perhaps 6 or 8. If a few drop off, that's okay. And it's quite a nice lunch there, and it's not expensive, and so we can work in with people coming along and sharing the experience with the lunch. So I'll keep you posted on that, but it looks as though it'll be a Thursday in July, hopefully one that's not cold or wet. Gary's not here. Alan's filling in for Gary. Alan, would you like to say a few words about events? Before he does, can I mention with the magic melodies, I've left a sheet out there for anyone who's interested. 4th of July, Lower Plenty Hotel, 10 o'clock. Connie Francis theme. You all remember Connie Francis. And we get a Devonshire tea and a 1-course lunch and Connie Francis for $25, which is not bad. So anyone interested, put your name down and then I'll make the booking with the Lower Plenty Hotel. Alan.
David, she's no spring chicken, apparently. She must be 85.
Yeah, we don't actually have her. The Lower Plenty Hotel couldn't quite afford to bring her out, but I would have assumed that the lady who's going to sing will sing like Connie Francis did at her peak.
Oh, yeah. I wondered about that, thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen and ladies. Well, Gary, give me a list here of what we've got to, what we have in the way of lunches. There's lunch at the Watsonia RSL at Oval Avenue, Watsonia, on June the 27th. Probus meeting is lunch on the 11th of July. Lunch on the 25th of July at the Reservoir RSL. And then in August, Probus lunch, and lunch, August the 22nd, the Darwin RSL. Now they're all laid out on the back there for you to sign up, and in the newsletter, so if you're worrying about that, there we are. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks for generously agreeing to look after activities whilst Gary is getting a few things attended to. And can I just remind everyone, Alan, that put their names down for lunch for the next meeting.
Yep.
so that we've got an up-to-date list to go to the club for the next club meeting, and that just means that things work better and we get a better flow with the meals coming through after our meeting.
The list is already out there for them to put the names on.
Yeah, for next month.
Yep.
Yep. Good. Thanks, Alan. All right. We're now going to move to Members' Corner, and it was going to be either Colin or Bruce, and they've worked it out that Bruce is going to give us a presentation in relation to the website, and particularly accessing the report, which Graham Ratton and John Metcalf put together. And Bruce will tell us more about that, and also the fact that the hard copies are here for those that ordered them. So I'll hand over to Bruce to give us a presentation on the website and the accessing of the report, and any other matters about the website that he'd like to mention. The website is proving productive. We're getting inquiries that are arising from people looking at our website, which is positive.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. Good morning. Just a couple of words about the 40th anniversary salute document. Physically, here it is, and for those of you who have ordered a hard copy, we have a list, and I'm going to put this on the table so you can collect your hard copy for those of you who are on the list. And so if you collect your copy today, could you tick or sign that you have collected it so we know? I noticed that a couple of people here, including the captain and vice captain of the team, are not here, so they won't be collecting their copies. That's okay, we'll have to get them to them some other way. But for those of you who are here and collecting your copy today, could you just indicate that you've taken your copy? They're in the box here beside me. I'll put the box at the table at the back for you to take the copy when you go. But the purpose of my presentation is for those of you who haven't got the physical copy, or even those of you who have and would like to see what it looks like on our website, which is open to the world, literally, then this is what the presentation that I'm going to give is about. It takes about 10-15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, certainly no more than 20 minutes, and then I'll hand over to Joe, who's going to give us our guest speaker presentation for today. I'll have to do the presentation not from here, the lectern, but I'll have to do it from my computer, like I did last time when I gave a presentation, because the presentation is on that computer. That computer is also recording the meeting, and so I can't physically have that up here doing two things at once, unfortunately. If we had two computers connected to the internet simultaneously, oh, I wish, then we could do that, but we can't do that. So I have to go down there and do the presentation from the desk. So my apologies for not standing here and doing the presentation. I also have to connect my computer to the projector. So you've got a minute or two just to talk amongst yourselves, a mini interval if you will, and then I'll start my presentation in about 1 or 2 minutes. So I'll be with you in a moment. Where's Colin? Can you just give us assistance, Colin, just to make sure we get this? I just need to get that HDMI cable. Gallipoli. Just to make sure it all works.
Gallipoli to the
You've got another one, eh?
I got another one? I got another one, but you've got to get it up to
Oh, if you've got another one, then we'll just pull it out.
A Life in Words, that's the title.
Here's another.
No, we had two. Makes it easier still.
This is a little bit shorter, but it should do the job. I'll give it to you.
Let's go to muck up the picture.
You out of yourself?
That's the other way.
You go. It's this one here.
Okay.
I'm an idiot. One sec. Should be having. Oh, here we are. I'm a sausage. That's in now.
Could you just push the forward?
Yep. Oh, you're clever. That'll be second one, okay? Might want to pick it up.
Well, obviously I'm a trumpet, I can't understand people who can't live with it.
How did you pair it up before? You know, I can use it well, but I don't, it's not the central role. I know, but you can't do that. You don't get it wrong. That's what happens. And of course, it's going to get on with this AI. The whole lot's going to change. With all the security. I give that too much.
Don't worry, I feel the same.
Projects are
I'm plucking out cards, think about getting it repaired.
Well, I don't know whether they'd probably be getting a new one with all the updates. Otherwise,
Okay.
there we are.
Just might need to.
That's the thing, everything gets changed within a few years. Beyond the time.
Keeps moving. It needs to be spot on because the slides go right to the edge of the screen. It might also be useful with this turn on stuff. Does this just slide out?
Yeah, that's it, we got it.
How do you access and use digital flip charts? On the left is what we would be familiar with as a physical flip chart, going way, way back in our history, certainly my history. And on the right is a representation of a digital or online flip chart. What I'd like to do in this brief presentation is show you how we have adapted the physical flip chart, in this case our online document, our physical document, to an online equivalent. Why is this important? The club's website is making more use of flip charts. The following are displayed in flip chart form now on our website. Under historical records, we now have the 40th anniversary salute document. We also have the 40th anniversary photo gallery. David made reference to that. We've beaten Provis South Pacific. It's there on our website now. And also the club's monthly newsletters starting from June are also in flip chart mode. So it's important that we know how to access them and use them. It's in our interest, I think, to know that. So the illustration behind today's presentation is to focus primarily on the 40th anniversary salute document, which is currently in flip chart form on the website. And I want to run through briefly how to access it and how to use it. If you can do that, you can also access newsletters and photo galleries and anything else in the future that we put onto the website in flip chart mode. So what does the website offer in particular? There's the physical form that I just held up a moment ago. It has 94 pages in the hard copy version. It's quite a substantial document. That's a very good document thanks to John and Graham's hard work. It's quite an amazing document. That is a snapshot of a couple of pages of the equivalent document in digital flip chart form. How do you find it? These are the steps you need to go through. I will make these steps available to you and show you how to get those steps at the end of the presentation. The first thing you need to do is to have an internet browser and to open it. That internet browser could be, for example, Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, one that I use, some of you may not have even heard of, Brave, and there are many, many others. It doesn't matter. It'll be whatever internet browser you use to access the internet. For this demonstration, it's going to be Google Chrome, a fairly commonly known internet browser. So having decided that you're going to use, for example, Google Chrome, you open it. And having opened it, you type in the search bar the website address, which is proviseidelberg.com.au. And that lands us on the home page of our club website. That's where we end up on our home page. The next step is to go to where the document resides, and that's on About Us Historical Records. And that can be found under About Us Historical Records. So we navigate to that page and click on it. When you click on it, this screen appears, which is the Historical Records sub-page, to use formal terminology. And to access the document, you go looking for it, as it were, and it currently is towards the bottom of the page. So you access that document simply by finding it, and when you've found it, at the moment there's only the two, you click on it. When you click on the document name, 40th Anniversary Salute Document, it opens the document in digital flip chart form. So you've now accessed it. We're ready to start seeing how to control it or use it in digital flip chart mode. And the controls are at the bottom of the screen. A bit hard to read in this presentation, and that's not the purpose of this particular view. So how do you use it? That's a larger view of the little control panel that comes with the flip chart. The controls are at the bottom. That's how you control or use the flip chart. And they are the individual controls and what they mean. There's quite a few of them, but don't panic. You don't need all of those. If you're a bit of a geek, and I don't think there are many geeks amongst us, I might be the only one, you don't need all of those. But when you realise what they are, you think, oh gee, you can do quite a bit with these flip charts. But as I say, the average Tom doesn't really need to know all of those by any means. So what do you need to know? Just 3 or 4. And those are these. That's really all you need to know. In fact, the one on the end, you could ignore that too. You just need 3. That's a relief. It's pretty easy to do. So in summary, that's what you really need to know to be able to use the flip chart to access and control or use the document in flip chart mode. There's an additional one which is very useful, and we'll see that in a moment. If you're using a computer like I am, and most of you would be probably, the escape key on the keyboard can be used additionally, as we'll see in a moment, but it's not part of that collection of instructions. Okay, so here is a brief demonstration, which I can't do on the computer, but it's a movie of a computer demonstration. So I'll just run it. It does have audio, but I will try and turn the audio off, and I'll just, if you like, commentate on the steps, just to show you what this actually looks like doing it. So, on the left of the screen, there are steps, and on the right of the screen, there are the internet browsers you could choose. Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, or one other. So step 1 is to open up your internet browser, and once you've opened up your internet browser, you then need to go to our homepage of the club's website, as I mentioned. And so opening up Google Chrome, there's Google Chrome, and step 2 says, okay, navigate to probisheidelberg.com.au. So you type that into the search bar and press enter, and you end up on the homepage of our club's website. There's homepage. So what you do now? Step 3, you go to About Us, Historical Records. So the next thing to do is to come across to About Us, Historical Records, and click. That takes you to the Historical Records subpage. Now we want to find the document, 40th Anniversary Salute document, and click on it. There it is. Click. And it loads the document in flipchart mode. So we can now move from accessing to controlling, but before we do, you might need to slide the view down a little bit so you can fully see the document, depending on the size of your screen. So just slide the view down with the slider on the right, and now we're ready to start using that control panel at the bottom of the screen. So let's run through the key items. The first one is previous page. The next one of interest is next page. The cross is converted into full screen mode. It'll take up the whole screen. Previous page again, there's no previous page because we're on page 1. Next page, if you click that, it'll start paging through. Click, 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 and it'll just keep paging through the document. And that's replicated up there on the side. Click, 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 and you can page through up there as well. 2 positions. Previous page is now available. You can go backwards. Previous, previous, previous. And it's replicated up there on the side as well. Click, click, and take you all the way back to the beginning if you wish. The full screen one is probably the most useful to most of us with failing eyesight. And it takes up the whole screen of your PC or whatever device you're using. And once again, page through, forward, page back. And now you can actually, if you want, zoom in, making it larger. If you want to see some of the finer details. The font size of the document is not all that large, so some of the finer detail could be enlarged. To get out of this, simply click the cross again and it takes you out and that's where the escape key comes in. So there's another step which says, if you're on a keyboard machine, which is a PC of course, you could use the escape key. So just to demonstrate that, if we just scroll down again so we can see the control panel, go into full screen mode, and on the keyboard, if you hit escape, it takes you out. That's essentially it. That's all you need to actually use the flip chart. So what do you do next? You might want to finish. You could either close the browser and go back to whatever you're doing, or you might want to stay on the website and do something else. I'll do that for the moment. So I scroll down and hit the back button, which takes me back to where I came into this page. Anniversary photo gallery. Have a look at this. It's another flip chart. Eat your heart out, Progress South Pacific. Photo gallery. Full screen. Page through. This is what John Jones Parry was doing with his camera. Some of these are in the newsletter, but only some. If you want to see them all, this is where you have to go. Escape, and we're back. What else is there? Go back. Go to About Us newsletters. The latest newsletter, June, is also in flip chart mode, whereas previously they weren't in this particular format. Full screen, page forward, next page, and so on. And there's that wonderful Devonshire tea awaiting us. Escape, we're out. So that's it. Now to get out of this particular browser, simply close it. And in the top right hand corner there's a little cross. That will close the browser. So that's all you need to know to access the digital equivalent in flip chart mode of the document and the other items on the website as well. There's an instruction sheet that looks like that. A bit hard to read here, and it's not intended to be read here, but I will email that to you probably this afternoon, and you'll have a copy of that. It'll be in colour if it comes to you in email. And towards the bottom of the instructions, there's a link to a movie version of the same thing. It'll be what I've just gone through, but a bit more elaborate and a better performance than what I'm giving you now. So if you want to see a video of what we've just gone through, slightly enhanced to what you're watching now, you can do that as well. So you have a one-page summary of how to do what I've just gone through, plus the option of a video as to how to go about doing it as well. So I'll email that to you, and you have the option of a video version to have a look at it as well. So that's it. Thank you. And may the club continue advancing the way it uses digital technology into the future.
All right. Some lights, Col?
Thanks, Bruce. I mean, another terrific presentation, and we are very fortunate to have Bruce's involvement and expertise, and our website is a great asset. Others from other clubs have remarked on it, and it's gradually getting more use, and I think also the ability to access guest speakers either live or by way of on demand is being recognised, and I'll say just a few more words about that when I introduce Dr. Joe in a few moments. But Bruce, again, many thanks from all of us for the work that you put in on behalf of our club. It's much appreciated.
Thank you.
Now, before we hear from Joe, our very learned and experienced musician, Noel, is ready to go, and we're going to start at page 8. Have we got the books, guys? We'll just get the books, song books, and go to page 8, and there's a well-known tune called "There is a Tavern in the Town."
We know that.
And we're going to sing 2 verses, Noel. 2. Page 8. There is a tavern in the town.
It's not page 8, though.
Is it?
Page 6.
Page 6, is it? Al, can I have one? Page 6. There is a tavern in the town, and there my true love sits me down and drinks his wine, and laughter free and never thinks of me. Fare thee well, for I must leave thee. Do not let the parting grieve thee, and remember that the best of friends must part. Adieu, adieu, kind friends, adieu, adieu. I can no longer stay with you, I'll hang my harp on a weeping willow tree, and may the world go well with thee. Right, next. Dark night they used to spark, and now my love runs true to me, takes that dark damsel on his knee. Very well, for I must leave thee, do not let me parting grieve thee. Remember that the best of friends must part. Adieu, adieu, amen, adieu, friends, adieu. I can no longer stay with you, All right, the next one is the Yellow Rose of Texas, which is actually on page 7. Page 7. There's a yellow rose in Texas that I am going to see. Nobody else could miss her, not half as much as me. She cried so when I left her, it did so break my heart. It never will I find her, we never all will part. She's the sweetest little rosebud that Texas ever knew. Her eyes are bright as diamonds, they sparkle like the dew. You may talk about your Clementine and sing of Rosalie, but the yellow rose of Texas is the only girl for me. And then on page 8, the famous When Johnny Comes Marching Home.
Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. We'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer and the boys will shout, the ladies they will all turn out, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell will peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah, to welcome home our darling boy, hurrah, hurrah. The village lads and lassies say, with roses they will strew the way, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Great, thanks Noel. Thanks Noel. Great to have you sing along. All right, well, our guest speaker really doesn't need any introduction, because although he's only been with us a short time, we've already started to know him well, and of course he gave us a little insight into his story not long ago, and that resonated so much with our group that when the committee considered guest speakers, we felt we just had to ask Joe to give a guest speaker presentation. And because there was so much for him to cover, we felt that it should be done in 2 segments. So today, as I understand it, with visual assistance, Joe will be telling us about his journey, his career, the places he's been to, the positions he's held, things of that nature. And with that background, next meeting, Joe is going to drill down in particular in relation to forestation and the importance of forests and how they relate to the very important issue we all face of climate change. And that's why I mentioned the technology, because, for example, my wife is a member of a climate change group in our parish who are extremely interested in what Joe has to say. And I said to them, they're very welcome to come along as guests if they wish to, but alternatively, they can plug in through our website, either live or subsequently. And that's an illustration of how valuable our website is. So, Joe, it's over to you, and I think you want to get yourself a little bit set up, and then away we go.
Thank you, David.
Turn the computer off and want to pick up the HDMI source. I think so. Should be the source working.
Yeah. Just leave this one like that together. Bruce will put it on.
Anyway, we'll do. It's okay. Yes, it's fine from you. Well, thank you, David, and thank you, gentlemen, and Diana. Oh yes, Bruce said I keep standing in the wrong place. I'm very honoured, actually, to be asked to give 2 talks, and I hope not to bore you. Today's is a sort of a family travelogue, because Diana and I and our children have moved around a lot around the world before ending up in Australia. We've had what we think is a pretty interesting lives, and I hope that some of it will be of some interest to you. It's not gripping travelogue, but I hope it'll be fun. And I'll be happy to take questions anywhere along the line. The story starts in the that was the house where I was brought up for some of my childhood, my father's farmhouse. It was a bit run down, and the farm was never a raging success, but that sort of thing happened in those days. This photograph was taken in the 50s. But to get our story started, got a problem here. It's not responding. That's it. Sorry, that was a bit of African music, which I thought I'd be smart and put onto the video, and then I decided against it, but it seems to have got stuck there anyway. I put these guys in just because I like them, because I came from Africa, and I've got a thing about African animals. The impala are concerned about the lioness. Unfortunately, creatures like this were long gone by the time we were farming in Rhodesia, which is where it was. My father's farm was a tobacco farm. Diana and I were met when we were students at Natal University in the 60s, and we got married in 1963. And we went to work, I went to work at a place called Matopo's Research Station in the southeast part of what was then Rhodesia. And I thought that was a good picture. You know, we've got this distant vision. Here we come. We had no idea where we were going. But we started off with all the hopes and aspirations of young marrieds. And I was at that research institute for 3 years. The politics of Rhodesia at that time were a little bit shaky. Coming down Africa, the African independence movements were gaining momentum and gaining strength. They started with Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and then went across to Kenyatta in Kenya, and Nyerere in Tanganyika, and Kaunda in Zambia. But we had a Prime Minister called Ian Smith, and Ian Smith was a believer in the superiority of white culture, and particularly the British culture. And he said, here we stand and here we stay, and the black nationalist movements stop right here, which will indicate to you, of course, that it was quite racist. In 1964, there was an election in which Diana and I voted. Ian Smith got in. We voted against him because his platform was essentially white superiority forever. And we didn't think that was viable, and indeed, of course, it wasn't. Sadly, it led in due course to a very ugly war, generally called the Bush War. And black people took over, the black community majority took over the government of Rhodesia in 1977, I think, and Rhodesia became what it now is, Zimbabwe. I did my national service, and somewhere along the line I was in the Guard of Honour for the opening of the first federal parliament, which was the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. It was Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia and Malawi. It didn't last very long. it succumbed to the pressures of nationalism and of the world disapproval, because the world at that stage really didn't like what we were doing in Rhodesia, and they had a point. There's all sorts of arguments about that, whether what happened was a good thing or a bad thing, but we won't go there. Dinah and her friend, it was rather cute, it's a little lemur, which came to us by jumping into our bedroom. And so we closed the window and kept it. And it was a delightful pet, which we had for a year or so. It used to make nests in the top of our cupboard. And it's an arboreal creature and with a wonderful ability to leap. And it used to leap out of the top of the cupboard onto Diana's shoulder in the early hours of the morning, and she'd lie there and play with it. When we got a baby, we had to let it go, and because it did have a slight tendency to bite when it was irritated, and it had sharp little teeth. So we didn't think that went well with a new baby, so we let it go, and it was a happy end to a lovely pet, because when I took it out to the bush and opened the bag, and it shot up a tree and was gone. The chaps on the right are running an irrigation experiment for me, or helping me run it. They were watering lucerne, alfalfa. Nowadays we'd have fancy control systems and so on, but I needed to apply an exact amount of water at known frequencies, and we had a high-tech business of a couple of guys with a drip thing in between them, and it worked quite well. That experiment was part of a master's degree I was doing, which has some implications for later. I have a couple of stories about our time as young marrieds at Matopa's, which may or may not be appropriate. One of them concerns the fact that we got a nice little new house, and it was on a slope, and it was completely undeveloped, a rough piece of country with a road going down to the gate, which we never closed. And Diana was struggling to establish a garden, and she had some calendulas, which is a really rather ordinary little flower. You probably know it, low-growing green with orange flowers. And the calendulas were getting established down by the gate, but something kept eating them. And one night, she woke up in the middle of the night and nudged, and said, "Go and see what's eating my calendula, see if you can do something about it." So I thought, oh my goodness. So I staggered out of bed and I got my shotgun. We didn't, I had 2 firearms actually in those days, and a big torch, and went out on the porch in the cold with my torch, and I shone the torch down the path, and I could see a couple of eyes in the calendulas. So I picked up the shotgun and fired. Now, I can still remember 60 years later, the muzzle flash of a 12-bore shotgun in the middle of the night is quite impressive. And the noise in a quiet African night is even more impressive. There's a hell of a bang. So I thought, oh my God. So there was a sort of a movement down in the calendulas, and I went back to bed. Questions were asked the next day because of the general, I mentioned earlier, the slight unrest in the communities. Who fired a shot in the middle of the night? And I had no idea. It wasn't very smart, but I was 24 years old, and you don't think... We had another little adventure which was quite funny. Also, in that little house, Diana nudged me in the middle of the night. She had a habit of that, not always for what I wanted. But she said, "There's a cow at the window." "Well, what do you mean there's a cow at the window?" "Well, look." And we had a big plate glass window, and there's this big muzzle, bovine muzzle going, breathing on it and misting it over and trying to figure out what this is all about. So I thought, look, there's cattle in our garden. So I said, okay, I'll go out the kitchen door at the back, and you go out the front, and I'll chase the cattle, collect them and drive them down the driveway and out of the plot. So we did this, but there was a disaster because I whizzed out of the kitchen door, and we had a clothesline with a support wire, and I tripped over the support wire, crashed to the floor, hurt myself, probably made a noise, startled the cattle. There were quite a few cattle in our yard, and off they went round the house, and I'm yelling, turn them, and Diana fled up the steps. I said, why didn't you turn them? She said, they were stampeding. I wasn't going to. So we had an interesting 10 or 15 minutes collecting the cattle and sending them out. Apparently there was a leopard killed a calf in the back paddock somewhere, causing a bit of upheaval. After we'd been at Matopo a couple of years, I met a guy. I went down to Natal for a seminar related to this master's degree I was doing, and I met a fellow who was one of the senior people in the South African Sugar Association Research Institute, and we got talking, and he ended up offering me a job. So we went down to Natal, and I've just put in some sort of African type pictures here because, as I said, I like Africa, loved Africa, okay? And there's a challenge I don't offer to anybody here. In the Bush Transit Lounge, if anyone can pronounce that word, I'll buy you a beer. It's pronounced Kakaba. And there's a Kakaba, the transit lounge. And it actually was the little bush airstrip, and we sat there, and it was on some trip or other. The move down to Natal was not a huge success. The guy who offered me a job turned out to be a bit of a martinet, and we got on fine on a personal basis, but not on a professional basis. And I had ideas about how I wanted to do science, and he had very clear ideas about what he wanted me to do, and he didn't need a bumptious 25-year-old who thought he was going to be a scientist. And by the way, the point I needed to make earlier, which I forgot, was the reason we kept moving was my ambition to be a scientist. I wanted to make it if I could in the world of science. So when opportunities came, then I took them and tried it. So we spent 3-4 years in Natal. It was fine, nice place to live. We had friends, good social life. Professionally, not very successful. But during the time at Matopos, I had met a senior person from the British science establishment, and then he came through South Africa a few years later. He was then the director of the Wallingford Institute of Hydrology near Reading. His name was Jim McCulloch. And I said to Jim, I'm really keen to get to the UK to see if I can get into a science job there. And he talked to me, he said, I don't think you've got a chance, you don't have the qualifications. But I know a guy who's got a big grant up in Scotland, and he's looking for a physicist to work on plant-atmosphere interactions. I'll write to him if you like, and you can try. Well, the upshot of that was that I was offered a 1-year fellowship at Aberdeen. The person who held the job, the big grant up there, could not fill the position, so he gave me a try for 1 year. And we loaded our then 4 little kids onto a boat, and we went to Aberdeen. I didn't even know where it was, actually. Everyone thought we were crazy, particularly Diana's parents, because it wasn't a particularly well-paid thing. And Scotland was a major culture shock. If you go from tropical Africa, where we'd lived all our lives, to the northeast of Scotland, you'd better be prepared to face some changes. And we faced all sorts of changes we hadn't anticipated, like huge changes in day length, and of course massive differences in temperature and so on. We rented places to live, one of which was that old house down on the right. It was an old Scottish farmhouse dating from the 17th or the 18th century. It was the coldest place you'd ever come across. We spent a winter in there, and the temperature in the stairwell area when you went into the house never got above 5. The heating was totally inadequate. 2 little fires, one in the lounge and one in the bedrooms. So it was it was very hard work. It was also hard for Diana because the fellowship that I was on had a stipend aimed at the support of one person, and by that time we had 4 little girls, so it had to support 6 of us. So housekeeping, I know, was a challenge. She used to go down to the local shop and made friends with the shopkeeper, and he would give her cracked eggs at half price and offcuts from the meat at the butcher and stuff like that. And I remember saying to her once, if you give me soup meat one more time and call it steak, I'm going to leave you. So it was pretty hard work, but we managed. We were young, we were resilient, and I was enjoying the science. I was working very hard because I was on a big learning curve. I was not qualified for the job, but I hung in there and did it reasonably well. So it was successful enough to have the position renewed for 2 years, so I got 3 years at the University of Aberdeen. It says I worked on the responses of Sitka spruce to environmental variables. Sitka spruce is an import exotic to the UK, a very important timber tree, and we were concerned with the way it functioned in relation to climate. And just a word here about science. I mentioned that my boss at the Sugar Association didn't like the way I wanted to work. He wanted me to do sort of plug-in science. You did experiments, you produced results, you passed them on to the sugar growers, and that was it. In Aberdeen, we did science designed to find out how things worked, and we never asked where that was going, which was actually a great way to work, and a lot of science goes that way, and it's actually a very profitable way to work, as you'll find out. I note that I went to the first international conference in Czechoslovakia, and that was interesting because it was just after the fall of the Prague Spring, and there was a guy called Dubček who was trying to bring freedom to Czechoslovakia, which was Soviet ruled, and he was introducing all sorts of he was removing controls on free speech and what you could and couldn't do and so on. And the Russians got fed up and sent the tanks in and quashed the Dubček regime. That happened about a week before this conference, and there was a whole lot of toing and froing. Would we go, would we not go? Well, we did go, and it was very interesting and very exciting for a young man out of Africa to go to Prague and to see at first hand what was happening in the politics of that place and the politics of Europe and the Russian business. The second big conference I went to was at Uppsala in Sweden, and that, just bear that in mind, because I met a guy there who also affected my future. And one of the ways we've moved so many times is that if I met people and they were interested and they offered opportunities, I took the opportunities. From Aberdeen, we went to England. I got a job, which I actually applied for in this case, at a research institute attached to the University of Bristol, doing research on apples and the effects of environmental variables and weather on apple trees. Here are some pictures of our life, our little bog standard suburban semi-detached house. Dinah's standing next to something called meadow orchards. There was work on miniaturizing apples so that you didn't have to get on a ladder to pick them. And there was a more standard orchard on the right at the top. The picture at the bottom is me addressing a group of growers about what I've called the NATO-funded experiment. We were at that place, Long Ashton, for 10 years. I discovered somewhere along the line that NATO handed out occasionally research grants. I didn't know that or what they were for, but I wrote to NATO and made contact, and I got a research grant to do collaborative work with a group in Montpellier in the south of France. And what we did was I grew 200 apple trees in dustbins, clonal material, all the same, and they grew for a year at Long Ashton, and then we split the batch and we put half of them on a truck and took them down to Montpellier in the south of France, which has a totally different climate. But in collaboration with the French scientists, we made all the same kind of measurements on the way these young apple trees grew and produced. And of course, you got very big marked differences because the one lot in Montpellier were in the bright, sunny French, southern French climate, and the ones in Bristol remained in rather sometimes dreary Bristol. It was a good experiment, actually, and it stood me well in good stead. Quick summary, we lived in England from 1971 to 1981. During that period, I went to all sorts of conferences, and I mentioned the conference at Uppsala. I met a guy there who wrote me a letter some time ago and invited me to take up a visiting lectureship at the University of Western Australia, which I thought was a great idea. My director didn't think it was quite such a great idea. I was going to be away for a year, and he wasn't that excited about it. I was running a small group and I was supposed to be there, but I persuaded him that I would learn all sorts of things that would be immensely valuable to our science and the rest of it, and we went to Western Australia for a year. The NATO grant I've mentioned, and later on, in about 1980, I was the holder of the Lawrence William Paulet Scholarship at the University of Sydney for 3 months, which I enjoyed. Dinah stayed in England because she was teaching. During that period, I was invited by CSIRO to interview for the position of Chief of the Division of Forest Research. I'd actually applied for it, so that's no big deal. And I went up to Canberra and I was interviewed for this position. And I came back, and there's a funny story attached to that, because a couple of days later I got a phone call, or somebody said, there's a phone, you wanted on the phone, and it was the secretary of the interviewing panel, and his name was Keith Avent, and he said, apropos this interview that you did the other day, the committee would like to see you again. So I said, oh yes, why is that? He said, well, we're down to a very short list and making a decision about this job. So I said, how short, Keith? He said, well, one. The point about that was that I had popped out of the woodwork. Apparently I was a filler on the short list. I was not a forester. I was working on fruit trees in England. I had worked in forestry in Scotland. But apparently I interviewed well, and they wanted somebody different, and they offered me the appointment as Chief of the Division of Forest Research of CSIRO, which I might tell you caused a big flutter in the dovecot of Australian forestry. The Australian forest people, the state people and the foresters were very unhappy about my appointment. CSIRO's Division of Forest Research was by far the biggest research group in the country concerned with forests and forest product growth and production. And they had gone and appointed a guy who was not a forester, no forestry degree, no real background in forestry, and wasn't Australian. So they were a bit unhappy, and there was quite a lot of pressure to try and get them reverse that decision. I was in that job for the contract period of 7, 8 years, whatever it is, and during that period I never really had an easy time with the forest industry people. They didn't like me much. Well, personally we were fine, we drank together and so on, but it was the same problem as I had with my boss in sugar industry. I thought that we should treat forests as ecosystems. We should understand how they worked, because you can't, my argument is that you can't really manage a system effectively if you don't know how it works. You're just guessing. And that's what they do, they guess. And they said, well, we've got standard measurements and procedures and we've been doing it for hundreds of years. And all of this garbage that you're encouraging on physiology and environmental physics and ecosystem studies on forestry, it's got nothing to do with the real world of forestry. I had the view that we should be able to predict, in the end, predict the growth of forests from basic scientific principles. And I have to say that 50 years later, I won that battle, because it took time. Because I produced a model, which I'll talk about next month, which actually allows you to predict the growth of forests and their response to climate and their response to management from basic physiological and biophysical principles. You don't have to just measure trees. And I heard the other day, it really takes time, that even the Tasmanian forest industry have adopted this model. So yeah, I'm glad I lived long enough to see it. After the end of my contract, I fiddled around a bit, spent time in another division, and then from 1991 to 93, I held the position of the Director of Natural Resources Management in the Murray-Darling Basin Commission, which was very interesting. I learned a lot about how Australian agriculture functions and the mess we're making of our country in the middle. Somewhere in that period, I'm not quite sure where, I went to Oak Ridge, Tennessee for 3 months as a visiting scientist and to work with a friend, which was really quite fun. Tennessee is an interesting place. They think they're the heart of America. They're not the deep south, but they're very different from the northern states, and you needed to be a bit sort of careful in Tennessee. I can remember, you know, there'd be the big old blokes in their pickup trucks with a rifle rack on the back, and if they talked to you, you call them sir. But, Oak Ridge was an important laboratory in the Manhattan Project during the Second World War, and that's an aerial view. It's a big place. And on the right is a picture of Diana and I. Diana came over and joined me, I can't remember, with the guy I worked with, who's right on the corner. You can see a red head just tucked away against the edge there. His name was Bob Luxmore, and that was their house, and they called it Solomon Hollow. I made a little note there, country music and a hog raffle, because Bob took me out. Tennessee is the home of country music, or they would say so. I mean, Nashville's in Tennessee. Bob took me out once to a concert one evening, and the concert was in a sort of a tin shed, about this size maybe, and tin chairs just on, you know, this kind of chair, and a group up on the low stage strumming away with their fiddles or whatever they did. And when they'd had their turn, Another group had a turn, and it was a fun evening. And at the end of the evening, they raffled a hog. But fortunately, we didn't win the raffle otherwise. So, yeah, I enjoyed Tennessee. But in 1993 or thereabouts, when I was through with the Murray-Darling Basin, somebody in the United States suggested to me that I might like to write and talk to NASA about the possibility of holding a visiting scientist position with NASA, because they have such positions to bring in new ideas. That's what they're supposed to do. And I was offered in a position with NASA based in Washington, and people say, well, why would a forest physiologist work for NASA? And the reason is that NASA does all sorts of science we don't know about, including a lot of remote sensing. And when you do remote sensing, you've got to have people on the ground to interpret the imagery that you are analysing. And I went to take part in some of the work on the analysis of forest responses to climate, which were being monitored from space, from aircraft, from measurements in the forest, and so on. I did not enjoy Washington. Despite the fabled hospitality of Americans, I found them generally, I won't say rude, but certainly uncaring. Nobody really made much attempt to make me feel at home. I was never very well briefed on the job, so I felt that I was never doing it particularly well. And you just sort of, there's your office, get on with it. When the weekends came around, it never occurred to anybody that there was this rather lonely Australian, Diana was still at home doing teaching jobs, sitting in his apartment across the Potomac from Washington National Airport, with nothing to do and nobody to visit with. So for a year and a half, I either just filled the weekend by going to the Smithsonian Museum, which is very wonderful, 14 museums, and it's amazing. Or sometimes I'd fly to Tennessee to visit Bob, or to Montana to visit a friend there, or to Oregon or whatever. And I went up to Canada quite a bit because the main project called Boreas was in Canada. Boreas, of course, relates to the boreal vegetation, which was the main object of our study. And it was very interesting, and I enjoyed the science part of it. I did not enjoy the social part of it. And my impression of Washington politics, and Washington society is basically negative. I would not go back there to work if it paid me a hell of a lot more than they did. But it was experience, you know, another thread in the rich tapestry of life and all that stuff. I came back to Australia and went back to CSIRO and worked on the thing that had been niggling in the back of my mind for all those years, which was developing a model of forest growth from first principles. And I worked there until I retired in about 2000. That photo on the bottom right is because one of the last visits I made while I was still employed was to Finland as a visiting professor at the University of Helsinki, which I really enjoyed. And Dinah came with me on that one, and it was lovely. I was there for 3 months. The people were nice. The job was nice. I felt I was doing something useful. And you'd think if you name a favorite country, you might not think of Finland, that Finland is a great country and they're great people. This department, I mentioned in the department sometime that Diana and I wanted to go up north of the Arctic Circle in winter. Now you know the Arctic Circle is 66 degrees north, I think I'm correct. And we were there into the winter, so we thought we need to do this. And I mentioned that we were going to do this, and they said, oh yeah, well we have this nice, and I'm going on too long, this nice chalet, and you might like to use it. And we had the use of this beautiful chalet, and we went up there and spent a few days up there, which was very pleasant and complete with sauna. Then I retired and we went to the Blue Mountains, where we took over the management of that house in the middle, which was purchased by one of our daughters and her husband. And we managed that place for 20 years. I remained involved in science and did a whole bunch of trips, mainly in a teaching role to postgraduate student workshops, which were held in South Africa, Sweden, Estonia, Brazil, Chile over the years. And the guys at the top left were sort of I suppose at that stage we were the senior group in that field. And the photographs are just to give you a taste of these workshops. The workshops usually had about 30 international students brought from all over the world. The teaching staff were paid for, at least they didn't pay us money, but they paid out airfares and what have you. And each workshop was about 2 weeks long. And I think that they were fun, the students were fun, and I think we made a significant contribution. There's another little story I like about that. At one of the workshops in Chile, I think the last one, there was this lovely little lady who came up with a textbook I'd written. And she said, oh, Dr. Landsberg, it's so exciting to meet you. I thought you must be dead. And I thought, well, that's fair enough. If you're 24 or 25 and the guy you're talking to is in his 70s, you have it's reasonable to assume that he might be dead. But I wasn't dead and I signed the book. And here are some more pictures, field trips, teaching, etc. Some cheerful French girls. The one in the middle, I think, is an Estonian girl. She was making like linen. And the left shows some instruments measuring flows of carbon dioxide and water vapor. And a couple of friends of mine, one down a root pit, and the others making wise scientific comments, no doubt. And that's about it. Very quick summary. The guys at the top are Chacma baboons, and they are very, oh, for heaven's sake, they are very mischievous. Sorry, someone's... turn that off, please, Bruce. I think it's... Sorry, I forgot to turn that off. And they sit there grooming each other. And the one on the right is a couple of elephants walking through our camp on the Zambezi when I went up there a few years ago. And I might tell you that I took that photograph from right next to my tent. The elephants took the view, which I think is reasonable, that this was their country, and if we put tents and rubbish in the way, that's our problem. And they wandered around through there when they felt like it. But you did need to treat them with respect. Great respect, very quiet, just, and then they'd go. The baboons were a different story. They would come into the camp and get into the tents and raid your food stores and what have you. So that's about the story, a quick summary, travelogue of a rather eclectic career. And Bruce says I'm out of position as usual. Next month, if you're interested, I will actually talk about the science that I did along the way. So thank you very much. If anybody's interested, I'll do a bit of selling. One of the books I wrote is a little book called Forests in Our Changing World, and it's actually not bad if you care to buy it.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question, please?
Yeah, yes, Rod.
I'm sorry, this is probably not quite in your field, but I'll bet you've got an opinion, and I would be very interested to hear it. This planet was formed some thousands of million years ago.
13.4
and it's
billion.
been undergoing cycles of warming and cooling ever since.
Yep.
Causes unknown, all sorts of theories, but nobody's sure. As far as I can see, we seem to be undergoing a period of warming at the moment.
Yes.
What percentage of that is natural and normal, and what percentage of it is due to human activities?
The big problem with the current warming cycle is the rate of warming. If you look at the geological record, there are, as you say, various cycles of warming and cooling. With the release of increasing amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, the Earth sort of stabilized, and for 10,000 years or something, since the last ice age, it's been a pretty good place to live. But since the Industrial Revolution, when the atmospheric CO2 was about 280 parts per million, we have been shoving carbon dioxide and other what we call greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at an enormous rate. I mean, just as an example, if you look at that appalling fire in Canada at the moment, and just imagine how much CO2 and rubbish is going into the atmosphere. And when we had the big fires here, and our constant production of cement and industry and so on. So the current level of CO2 in the atmosphere is over 400 parts per million. And CO2 traps long wave radiation, sorry, a little bit technical, but it means that the sun shines on the Earth. To maintain equilibrium, you have to have a heat loss equivalent to the rate of heat input. Well, it's not anymore. So over the last 100 years, and certainly over the last 50, the rate of warming is far faster than anything we have observed that you can observe from the geological record or ice cores or anything. So it's human caused. What the percentage is, I don't know, but basically the temperatures are going up and it's our fault.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Joe. You've really whetted our appetite now for next month.
Thank you, David.
And we're very grateful. And Diana's here. I noticed Diana didn't jump up and seek to correct anything that Joe said in terms of their life experience. So we can take that, Diana, as an affirmation. But we're very grateful to Joe to share his experience and his knowledge with us at a time when we need to get as much information about this as we can get. And we're lucky to have someone in our group who can provide it. So we're very grateful, Joe. Thank you. And also to just give us that beautiful insight on the various places that you went to. Having visited Africa, my wife and I, we were left with an experience we'll never forget. Not just the terrain, but the people. So I think we're moving along fairly well, guys, up there at the bar, ready to go. And thank you all for coming. Hopefully our president
won't get scheduled to dispense justice next month, and Mick will be back from the far north. But relax, enjoy a nice meal, a few excursions on the way, and otherwise see you in
Just remind people.
July. And Bruce is just asking me to remind you to collect your volumes and tick off your name. That is, those who have ordered the publication. Okay, thanks.